Okay, I would like to suggest the following procedure for the panel discussion. First, I would like to ask all panelists two questions, and I would like to ask the opinion of the panelists to these questions. And then after that, maybe have some time for questions and comments between the panelists. And finally, I would like to open the floor for questions and comments from the audience. So first, I would like to ask to all of you two questions. I think in your presentations, you mentioned various challenges to transdisciplinary education and research. Which of these challenges do you think is the most important? If we can make some, I don't know whether we can make some hierarchy of challenges, but usually if we try to solve some problem, we make some kind of hierarchy and we try to go from there to find some solutions from the most important challenge, so to say. So this will be the first question, and the second question is taken from the subtitle of the symposium. What can we learn from the European experience? So starting from Professor Endo.
Thank you very much. Those are very tough questions. And I think the most difficult thing in transdisciplinary education research activity is to share the common goal between stakeholders. For example, in case of Azumino, I'm drawing in is the question is rather simple because everyone knows that the groundwater, the lowering of groundwater level is a problem. So we can share the common goal very easily. But when I heard that, say, climate change program in Germany, I have no image what kind of goal they share in talk of climate change. What they have in mind when they hear the word climate change, what they have in mind may not always same. So it's the setting, the sharing, the common goal may be the most difficult point to proceed transdisciplinary education research project.
Thank you. So, thank you.
For first questions, the most important challenge is I think that the engagement with ownership of stakeholders and trust building. And also I raise one more point that especially for the Japanese universities, it's the organizational capacity or capability of the universities or research institutions. Because many Japanese researchers, professors are very busy for research and education. But the transdisciplinary research itself needs much more time and much more effort than the traditional research, because building networks with the stakeholders, local communities, and the citizens. From my experience of study of the Japanese cases of transdisciplinary research, the successful cases has in successful universities, they have their own professionals or practitioners who conducted all such kind of activities. For example, in case of the Kyoto universities, the university research administrators work very hard for building the networks with their counterparts in Asian countries. And in other cases, the mobility research center of the Nagoya University, they have the liaison officers in village because the village officers know very well about their local communities. So if they want to develop the real world experiments in the villages, they consult with the liaison staff at the village and what kind of difficulties, what kind of problems they will face. So such kind of the collaborative framework is very important for the trust building and the continued community engagement in transdisciplinary research. Thank you.
Thank you. I think everyone in this room will agree that Japanese professors are very busy. Okay, next, can I ask Professor Renn for your answer?
Yeah, well, thank you very much, Dimitar, for giving these very challenging questions. And let me start with question number one. What is the most top challenge? And I would like to name two. The first one is overcoming the silo mentality within the sciences, but also between the scientists, stakeholders, and the policy-making institutions. And what we can see very often is that each discipline or each sector feels that they are the most important one in any kind of issue in terms of problem solving, but also in definition of the problem. And very often it takes a lot of time, which is to give them the idea that there are other perspectives that are just as crucial and important as their own. And that is a very major challenge. And of course, we have a lot of rhetoric in terms of interdisciplinarity, but when it comes really to the bottom line, we often find that that interdisciplinarity is not really a part of a living culture, rather than just a rhetoric culture. And the second challenge, which I can see, is the transfer from knowledge to action. That's something that, of course, many of you have already mentioned. We do have a lot of knowledge towards what is needed to be more sustainable, but it's not done. And I think that's certainly something where we see how we can make sure that what we know, what we feel is right, even if we have orientation knowledge that tells us, yes, we have to have, for example, a carbon-free economy in 2050, we'll still see that a lot of stakeholders believe either we are not touched by this, or others have to do first and then we can go second, or we still have enough time to do that. So there are millions of excuses not to do something. And that's something I think we need to address, in which way we can really activate the various important stakeholders to think it's our task now to implement things. It's not that we wait for others to do it. And that's something we see worldwide, that everybody puts a buck from one to the next. And that, of course, doesn't help. So I think those are two major challenges. And to the second question, what can we learn from Europe? I mean, we can also learn a lot from Japan. I've heard quite a very interesting examples here today, specifically on how community levels can help to improve the situation and to really apply transdisciplinary studies. I think in Europe, we have done a lot in terms of living labs. That's something I haven't seen so much in Japan. So I think that's a part of a experience that we can bring to Japan, but also, some of more participatory bodies and participatory formats that I felt had not been so popular in Japan, but I think were very successful in Germany. So those are two things that I would like to mention.
I completely agree. And actually, I don't know whether in Japan we have any living labs. Professor, do you know, Professor Yamada?
In case of the gerontology study, the Institute of Gerontology of the University of Tokyo operates several living labs in Kashiwa Prefecture, Kashiwa City of Chiba Prefecture, or Kamakura City. But very small.
Yeah,
but
I think it's quite limited.
Yeah, but in Kashiwa city cases, they have agreement with the city prefecture, city government, and then they have the living lab in the care center of the Kashiwa city, and they invite the private companies join the Living Labs. They test their prototype solutions and prototype models, and then can monitor their result of the experiment. But also the care managers and to say users of the care center is already voluntarily contributing that kind of real world experiment. And the living lab itself is very to say that it's living lab movement has just started, but recently it is converted to the social innovations communities. But they use the living lab, the term of the living lab. But I think that the actual style and scheme is different from the Beijing gerontology studies to the social innovation communities activities.
Yeah, thank you. Another amazing thing which I kind of found from Ortwin's presentation was the participation of citizens in the policy making process. And I think this is still very, in a rudimentary level in Japan, something that Japan can learn from all those achievements. Okay, so going to Daniel, could you please answer the questions?
Yes, I'm happy to do so. Shall I directly go into both of the questions, Dimitar?
Yeah, why not?
Whatever you prefer. Okay. So with regards to the challenges, I agree what has been said before, and just want to build on the, one of the major challenges of transdisciplinary research is that it requires, and this was also kind of indicated by the previous statements, it really requires a rethinking of a rather competitive mode how we do research to a more collaborative approach, how we engage in research, which also includes, and I think at the first point we would all agree that this is good. But I think this really goes to the fundamentals of many things, how we have done research and collaboration over the last couple of years. We really established certain power constellations. We have a way how we compete for funding, and really doing transdisciplinary research with all the components that we have discussed about, acknowledging that there are different types of knowledge. This addresses certain power constellation in our society and also goes to the fundamentals of research. So it's no longer a primacy of scientific research. Scientific knowledge is the best, but it's really different types of research, different types of knowledge need to be brought together. If we think about collaboration instead of competition, it really also means that what Ortwin mentioned, we have to break silos, and it's really about different money flows that will happen. Money from certain areas will run to other areas, and I think if we really want to take transdisciplinary seriously, it's really more engaging in this collaborative mode of collaborating within science, and also collaborating beyond science. Just one brief mention, and I also strongly agree with Ortwin about the knowledge to action gap. The nice thing with the real world laboratories or living labs is really that you also have this feedback you have kind of from action to knowledge. So through acting, you increase the knowledge, and I think this could be really a very interesting iterative mode of the relation between knowing and acting. So it's not only we know and then act, but it's also through acting we increase the knowledge that we have. And I think that's very adequate for the complexity of our societies we are currently living in. So with regards to the what can Japan learn from the European experience, I think this is a tricky one, because I think it's really we should learn more from each other than directionally from one continent to another continent. And I think we should really create the spaces like today, but maybe also with the interconnection of different institutes to really learn from very context-specific experiences we make, to see if we get understanding that is more context independent. So really to advance our practice of transdisciplinary research. And maybe this is really one thing where I think Europe has done a lot over the last couple of years, and where maybe a learning might be there is really a kind of I would even call it the professionalization of transdisciplinarity. So there has been quite some funding to really advance methodologies in transdisciplinary research. We have now, and Ortwin is also part of this, we have now established a society for transdisciplinary and participatory research. Ortwin was for a long time engaging in a journal that fostered transdisciplinary research already, or that put transdisciplinarity in its core already 25 years ago, more than 25 years ago. And I think it's this type of professionalization that I think could still be more in Germany and Europe, but I think that really advanced kind of the practice of transdisciplinary research. And I think that's something where I think Europe has really made major advancements over the last couple of years.
Yeah, I completely agree with you that it should be a two-way street and mutual learning. However, when you mention about professionalization of research, I think Europe is much ahead. So there's a lot what Japan can learn from those experiences. Let's hear from Professor Ikeda.
Okay, so my answer to the first question is to avoid the silo mentality. That is the most important one. When approximately 10 years ago, I proposed a transdisciplinary research group in GSAIS. It was a strong mental resistance for the idea. So we had a serious discussion. We had to have a serious discussion to introduce that kind of research group to conduct the human survivability study. So still, even today, it is true. So we need to continue this discussion to avoid the silo mentality for the fruitful transdisciplinary study. This is the first my answer to the first question. The second one is we know that a lot of accumulation of the research outcome in transdisciplinary study in Europe. So I want to learn the typology of the transdisciplinary studies, outcome of the transdisciplinary study in Europe. So I don't know how to make a typological study for in this field, but I want to discuss how to make a typological study in this field with professors. Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, I think this is already like discussion between our panelists. So Professor Ikeda wants to know how to make a typology of transdisciplinary research. Our German colleagues, do you have any suggestions about that?
I can briefly start how we have done, there are two approaches, and we have done one study, and there are several other studies where we really try to create such a typology of transdisciplinary approaches, analyzing, I think it was around 70 transdisciplinary projects in Germany, and we were really able to then differentiate. I think it was at the end of the day 5 or 6 types of transdisciplinary research. Other colleagues in a project that is called TD Academy, they have worked or are still working on societal impacts of transdisciplinary research and on scientific impacts of transdisciplinary research, also drawing this back to the application of certain methods, etc. So there is empirical research that is emerging on the different types of transdisciplinary research, and what we are currently mainly in the area of real-world experiments and real-world laboratories. What we are aiming for is really to have thorough case descriptions, like we have in medicine, for instance, of these different processes, to then really engage more into cross-case comparisons. But I'm happy to provide some insights and some papers with you if you're interested into this more empirical work related to typologies of transdisciplinary research. Ortwin, maybe you want to complement.
Well, it's not much to compliment. I think there are a couple of articles that really trying to give a systematic overview of different concepts in school of transdisciplinarity. There was one last year in which I was also involved. The main author is Mark Lawrence from our institute, and Patricia Mans, who used to work in our institute, where we try to look at the different schools of transdisciplinarity and their variants, and then trying to delineate some concepts. Something similar I had written 2021 in the journal Futures, also an overview of different transdisciplinary approaches and what they mean in terms of conceptualizing and implementing their different approaches. I would really strengthen the view that it's good to look at empirical case studies, because very often concepts are, of course, very patient when it comes to what you can do and what you should do. But then, if you do it in reality, of course, things are very often different, and then you need to have a lot of contextual issues that you need to address. Nevertheless, I think there are quite a few good overviews available. One also in which Daniel was involved, and I think was even mentioned several times now during our talks, which that kind of crossed over between stakeholder involvement and scientific input has been really highlighted. And I think that's certainly one of the major features of transdisciplinary research. I can, of course, share you some of these articles. Some of them I think I've sent to Dimitar already, but also that you can see what the concepts are being discussed in Europe, partially in the United States, because they often also had been published in US journals. And it would be great to have an interchange here with conceptual works that some of you have done.
Thank you very much, Professor Ikeda. Is that fine?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. We want to keep the discussion on this issue. Thank you very much.
Yeah, let's continue the discussion after the symposium. So if any other panelists have some questions to the other panelists, please ask something if you want.
Yes.
Yeah.
I have a question to Professor Renn. Nice to meet you. I'm Takahiro Endo. And I'm very curious of how did you choose local stakeholders in transdisciplinary projects, especially in climate change projects? And I think, for example, I do not think ordinary people do not spend a weekend, for example, to attend the meeting. So if the government or researchers trying to collect stakeholders, those who come to the meeting may be person who has strong interest in the policy. So that may be workers in coal mining districts, or it's a fisherman or something. So those selecting those stakeholders may not produce sustainable orientation solutions. Now, I think there is some kind of risk. So I'm very curious about how do you choose local stakeholders in your project? Thank you very much.
Shall I answer it directly, Dimitri? Okay. Yeah, thank you very much. This is a very interesting question, of course, also a very challenging question. We normally deal with three different constituencies in these areas, specifically in the area of sustainability. One is science community, and that's basically natural science and meteorological science, but also, of course, social science and political science. The second constituencies are the organized stakeholders, and I think we're very, pushing emphasis on organized stakeholders. So those are industries, there are private sector associations, these are NGOs, and of course also other kind of organizations, for example, in Germany, like the churches or the unions. And then thirdly, we have the affected citizens. So those are people who are affected by these kinds of measures. And very often what we try to do is to draw a random sample of these citizens so that everyone has the same opportunity to be drawn into the body of deliberation. And then the big issue is, how do we get the three things together? And you're right, there is conflict, and we should see that there is conflict. Now, the one thing is that if you have the stakeholders together, very often they make claims about knowledge. And now we can say, okay, well, you claim X, Y, Z. We have a science board in the background, and those are all scientists, very good. We can give those claims to them, and they can look whether they're true or not true. So this is what we call joint fact-finding. So it's a joint way of doing it, but there is a clear indication that if scientists say this is nonsense, that somehow this is not being, strongly supported. At the same time, it's very clear that if scientists say, well, that's a kind of knowledge that you cannot test, that of course is very legitimate. Another thing is when we have value differences, and we often have value differences when we have different interests. I mean, we have the coal industry, as you said, that would like to keep coal mining. They won't say it that way, but they will say, okay, we need more time. And yes, we believe that we need to get rid of coal, but not so quickly, and so on and so on. So we have all the rhetorics there. We have the NGOs who don't have time and saying we want to have to close down all coal-fired power plants within a year. And so, you get conflicts that you cannot resolve. And now one of the nice thing about this, the random selection of citizens, is that you say, okay, what would the people who are affected by it say? Now we have a random selection of people there, and we give them the question. We ask them, what would you think would be good, wise decision by the government? Should we close down the coal-fired power plants, even if it means so many people are out of work, even if it means we may have an increase in price at the time? What is your timing that you think the government should do? So they are working a little bit like arbiter in this kind of debates. A third element that I would like to mention is when we are within the stakeholder groups, it is very important to have not only polarized stakeholders there. So very often we've seen stakeholder roundtables in which there is one side which is totally pro-environmental protection, the other one is totally against it. We'll never reach an agreement there. However, if you have quite a few organizations in the middle, as I said, we have the unions there, we may have representatives of the churches there, which are quite still important in Germany, Catholic and Protestant church, or other kind of associations that are not aligned to one or the other extreme. That helps a lot because they can say, oh, I don't buy your argument from one or the other side, or we need to have a compromise here. And it's not coming from the facilitator, it's coming from the participant. And we have seen very often that if we have a fairly, let's say, balanced composition of stakeholder groups, that helps us quite a bit to reach something like at least a compromise, if not even a consensus. But crucial is that we have all the three constituencies interacting with each other, the scientists, the stakeholders, and the affected citizens. And of course, we don't expect the citizens to be better scientists, and we don't expect the scientists to be better citizens. We need to make sure that each can contribute what they are best at contributing. And if we can do this, this is what I've said is the essence of catalytic science, of building a very good process. And then it really helps.
Thank you, Ortwin. This is really helpful.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I really appreciate. Yes, and I
very welcome.
giving us very nice words to avoid polarization and joint consensus building and not solution but compromise. Yes, compromise is important word to make a good solution. Thank you very much.
Yeah, you're very welcome. Thank you for the question.
Because time is advancing very quickly, I would like to have a couple of questions from the audience. So, does anyone want to ask a question? Okay. Introduce yourself.
So, thank you for today's event. My name is Muhammad Hafiz Ashapan. I'm a first-year design student, but I'm from Indonesia. My question actually would be, during the presentation, especially from the professor from Germany, I heard a lot of, you mentioned a lot about the participation of the youth. So I find it interesting because, for example, in Germany, you have the green parties and lots of European countries has them. And most of them are supported by younger people. However, for example, in my country of Indonesia, the youth participation is still quite low, still quite low. So, do you have any ideas on how to increase the youth participation, especially in a country that's quite whose youth are not familiar with, they don't really care about politics in a sense. So, thank you.
Thank you.
Daniel, would you like to start?
I can start. I think that's a very important question, and it's definitely not easy to answer. But I think, and here I also see a huge chance of transdisciplinarity. So a huge possibility is in schools and in universities where young people can really start in a sense of education for sustainable development, really engage in concrete projects in developing, co-designing, co-developing solutions. And I think it's a mutual way. So it's on the one hand side, it's enabling the youth. And I think here universities and schools can really play a major role. And on the other hand side, and we have discussed a lot about trust also, is really to listening to the youth. So I think I would not only, or I would not even mostly give the responsibility to the youth, but I think it's really also in university leaderships, but also in community leadership, that the voices of the youth are then heard. And as I said, I think this is at least the experience we have, and I know several examples from countries around the globe. There are wonderful colleagues in Malaysia, for instance. I can connect you to them, who do a lot of transdisciplinary projects with the students in communities, also engaging with traditional and local knowledge, etc. It's for instance, in the International Islamic University in Kuala Lumpur. There I know several colleagues. So I think it's really a chance through this transdisciplinary student engagement in concrete projects where the participation of the youth can be fostered, and where I know several examples also in, as I said, in different countries, and where this was possible. I hope this answers to a certain extent your question.
Yeah, if I can add, Mohammed, thank you very much for your question. I think it's a very crucial question. And I think one of the features of transdisciplinary research is that it is culturally sensitive. And I think that's something that's extremely important to say. Well, we have to see what is the political culture in the country that you come from, Indonesia, and or different areas of Indonesia, again, that differs. And what is kind of an opportunity there, what are barriers there, but also what are chances that you can make changes. And very often I found out that if the closer you are to the community level, the easier it is. Because if you go up the political ladder, I think sometimes very difficult if you have a fairly autocratic governance systems because they feel threatened by transdisciplinary research. On the community level, a little different, and also we have traditions, specifically in Indonesia, for town hall meetings and other things that are, that you know of, and you can use them. And I would really echo what Dania just said. I think the universities and the young people now have the opportunity to seize those opportunities. I think that's extremely important. Not, to say, okay, we need to wait for the big revolution until everything is getting better. Probably wait for that forever, but to really look, what are the opportunities right now, and moves the boundaries of what possible just inch by inch a little further. That is very often more promising than trying to change everything at the same time. I think you're very right in saying that that doesn't work, but looking into cultural sensitive possibilities and opportunities is certainly one way to go forward.
Thank you so much for your answers. It would be honored if you would connect me to your colleagues in Malaysia. Thank you.
You are very welcome.
Thank you very much. Maybe one more question.
Can I? You accept the question from Zoom?
Please.
Okay. So thank you very much for the wonderful discussion. I'd like to raise one thing, because you say that because of the many different stakeholders in the transdisciplinary research. I would like to say that according to my experience in the working for the UN for the 10 years ago, that if we have a kind of an international conference, there are different sectors, academia, and also the participant, and also the governors, and they have own different goal, because the participant or residents need action which has been committed by the government, but always academia or like UN staff, they require the final document or academic output, right? So they are not interested in doing the ordinary stuff, like which has already been discussed. But if you implement the same things, I think there is not big value as an academic field. And then, but residents need a concrete action to be taken. They are not interested in at all how complex, how interesting that's the thing, but they need a direct response. And of course, there is a transdisciplinary. It's a different goal in the field of the study, but depending upon I think the stakeholder. The position, I think the output become very, very complex. And when we need to concrete in the final document, I think there are big debate between the who write the document and who need a compromise output. And I would like to get some of the opinion regarding this kind of different goals. Because of their position, standing position. Thank you.
So, who is your question?
Yeah, if you can argue something about because you are saying that this transdisciplinary study require many different stakeholders, and I would like to raise some of the that kind of issue, and I would like some Professor Ortwin or some can you argue something about that?
Yeah, I can start. Thank you, Professor Yamashiki, for your question. I think it's a very important issue, and it addresses again the issue between knowledge and action. What we can see very often also international negotiations is that scientists come in and they're fairly arrogant and saying, you know, what people should do. And of course, in the background, they have their scientific facts and their scientific figures. And it's very clear, for example, climate change, you have to do X, Y, Z. And what they very often don't see is that in the area where those things need to be implemented, there are quite a few trade-offs between climate change, between economic development, between social conflict resolution and other kinds of things. And the practitioners who are at the communities very often feel, being belittled by scientists. And that, I think, is something that we hope that transdisciplinary science could overcome. That we as scientists come in and say, look, we have good data about things, but we need to know your context. We need to know where you live, and we need to know what your trade-offs are. And we can help you with our knowledge to get over these trade-offs, but we are not telling you what to do. And I think that's extremely important. I've been in a lot of international committees, and as soon as somebody stands up and says, I know what you should do, it never works. And that's, it's human, but it's also, I think, a very practical application. And I think it's very important that first those who are practitioners understand that better knowledge, also about complex relationships, help them to be better politicians. And that's also a difficult thing to do, because very often politicians come up and say, oh, we know everything is complex, but things need to be done right now. And that's what we need to do. And people are standing in front of my door and they ask me to do X, Y, Z. And I cannot think more about what X, Y, Z all implies. We just have to do it. And then, of course, we have a lot of very short-sighted decisions. So in the sense is both sides need to learn from each other. And I think that's not easy to implement. So we need scientists who, away from the scientific hubris of knowing everything, and really taking all these practitioners very seriously and trying to understand the context in which they operate. And we need, of course, policymakers who understand that they don't have the perfect knowledge of what's going on, and that even if they have good intuitions, they may be totally wrong if there are very complex relationships. And so this kind of mutual learning, I think, is the one thing that we would like to implement. And if both sides are willing to do that, I think it can be extremely effective.
Thank you very much. I think there are Professor Lang.
Yeah, if I briefly can complement what Ortwin just said. So I think I fully agree that this is a key topic and a challenging topic. And it also addresses one of the major challenges we have, or I see in transdisciplinarity, is really how to get transdisciplinary approaches that work very well on a local context-specific level to a global level. And I think we don't have yet the answer. There are some tries how to really do this. But I think that's for the further development of transdisciplinarity, that's really a very interesting and highly important question, because, as I said, it's often transdisciplinarity is very context-specific, works in local areas, and how to bring this to the global level is a challenge, and I think an interesting next question for further development. But it's interesting to see that in many of the UN endeavors, transdisciplinarity is increasingly mentioned as a key to really solve or address sustainability problems. And the prominent example is, for instance, the Intergovernmental Science Policy Platform on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services, IPBES, where transdisciplinary approaches are right from the start have been ingrained as a key component. So in IPCC, it's also increasingly mentioned that transdisciplinary approaches are needed, but in IPBES it was, for instance, really right from the beginning ingrained into the core approach of IPBES.
Thank you for Yano Sensei to giving me opportunity for the question. Thank you.
Time is up, so please allow me to close the panel discussion, and please let's have an applause to all our panelists. Finally, I would like to give the floor to Professor Saito to give the closing remarks?
Right, thank you very much. Especially, I want to thanks to the invited speakers who joined me today, Professor Renn and Professor Renn from Germany, and also Professor Yamada from JST, and Professor Endo from Osaka Metropolitan University. And also I want to thank Professor Ikeda from joining, part of the discussion from GSAIS, and Professor Yamada who organized this symposium, and also to our students who, help us organizing this symposium. So I think, at the GSAIS, we are working on this transdisciplinary research, and we all know it is a challenging, topic. And we need friends and we need colleagues so we can discuss. And different, this symposium, we are doing this so we can learn more things about transdisciplinary. And also the students can learn that they're not alone. There are friends and colleagues outside us also working on transdisciplinary research. So again, thank you very much for joining this symposium, and we want to keep in touch and we want to continue this discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you. This will be the end of the symposium, but our discussions continue even after that. So good evening and good day, and see you soon. Goodbye.
Bye-bye.
Bye bye.